Now the brilliant thing about rhododendrons is don't be put off by the size of this one behind me. There are rhododendrons to suit every garden space. Big ones, small ones, some in the middle. You know, there's one that will suit your garden and also one that will suit your colour taste as well. Rhododendrons are pretty robust, beefy evergreen plants that will thrive as long as you get the soil conditions right. So really there's not a great deal to do, but the one thing you must do is make sure that you keep them well mulched on the surface of the soil after planting. So keep that topped up with a really nice layer of leaf mould or well rotted garden compost so that that keeps decomposing into the soil and keep that plant really happy, because if you don't, you'll end up with brown bits around the edge of the leaves, some of the branches dying back, and a totally unhappy plant. So keep it well mulched and your plants will thrive. Now rhododendrons and azaleas can't be propagated by the amateur from seed, because if you did try and save seed and sow it, you'd find that each one would come up as a different variety. It would be a different colour, it might not perform particularly well. So the main way that we propagate rhododendrons and azaleas really is from semi-ripe cuttings. Now that means waiting until the summer when the new shoots that have been made in the spring have started to toughen up. So you can see here that there are 3 shoots that have been made this year. We could take all 3 of these as cuttings. So what we do is we cut these right off down to the base where the growth started to be made in the spring, and we remove those low down, and we've got 3 semi-ripe cuttings that we can take off to the potting shed or the kitchen and get them prepped up, ready to get in the compost. It's really tricky to get them to root, but it's worth a try if you've got a variety that you really do want to grow. So you need to use stems of the current season's growth, new stubby little shoots if you like, and generally take them in around about July time, perhaps into the beginning of August. So I've collected these from the main bush, and I'm just going to use secateurs to cut them individually from that main shoot, because I've got 2 really good ones on there. This one's probably a little bit scrawny to use, but I've got 2 good ones on there to use, and then this is a really good beefy new shoot here. You can see I'm coming down to where the growth started in the spring this year and cutting just above that. Then it comes down to preparing the individual cuttings. So we want to use the secateurs again to cut at a nodal point. You can just see the little eye or nodal point here on this stem. I'm just going to cut below there. I'm then going to use this craft knife to cut off some of these leaves low down here at the bottom. You can see in the tip of the cutting that there's a really good bud that's quite dormant, so that's not going to start into growth until next spring, so we can leave that in place. We don't need to remove that. But what we will do is we'll reduce the leaf area, because these big leaves will lose moisture if we're not careful. So I'm going to use that to cut the leaves in half crosswise, leaving all of the leaves on but cutting them in half. So having made the cutting, we're then ready to put it into a pot, and I choose a terracotta pot because the sides of the terracotta will let some air in and it stops the cutting getting over wet, because if it becomes too saturated in the compost, the cutting's likely to rot off. And simply push the cutting in at the side of the pot, push it right up to the base of those leaves into that compost, then tap the sides of the pot, repeat with another couple of cuttings around here. Then this is ready to be watered. Give it a good slosh of water with a watering can with a fine rose attached. Let that excess drain away, and then pop this on a well-lit windowsill indoors where it can be left and kept an eye on, or put it out in a shady place in the garden, but keep an eye on it. Water it perhaps once a week, and you'll find that those cuttings will probably take about 2.5 months before they start to callus over and produce roots. Then hopefully by next year you'll have some new rhododendron plants to put in the garden. Now, like any woody plant, rhododendrons and deciduous and evergreen azaleas still need pruning, even though you might not know where to start. You plant them, get them growing, they grow into quite large shrubs and then flower, but then you think, well, where do I cut off? And the best time to prune them is after they've finished flowering, and to take out some of the growth to allow air to circulate through the plant. So you want to get it to regrow from the base, because if you don't, the plant will just get bigger and bigger and more woody. You'll just get an outline of flowers, if you like, around the outside and loads of dead wood in between. And if you look into this plant, you can see exactly what I mean. If I pull those branches away, you can see there's loads of dead woody material in there. So we need to cut away into this outer growth to allow light and air to get through into this bush. And as I say, the best time to do it is immediately after it's finished flowering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into here and I'm going to take out some of these clusters of foliage because they're all too packed together. So this is a really nice one here, but if you look behind, this is very, very thin and weedy because it's not getting enough light or air. So I'm going to take that one right back down to the main stem at the back, and as I start to cut into it, it will become more obvious what I'm doing. So I'm taking out these stems to open up. So here, for example, you can see that there's a really big stem here that's really looking nice, but underneath is a really weak and weedy one. So I'm just going to cut that back to there. So what I'm going to aim to do is work through the whole bush, taking out the thinner stuff that's tucked in here and leaving some of the stronger growth in place, ready for next year. You might think that rhododendrons are pretty tough and that they don't suffer from very much at all, but there's two things to really watch out for. The first one to look out for is black buds. If you see black buds on the plant during the winter, snap them off between your thumb and forefinger, get rid of them because they'll only infect other plants. It's a fungal problem and it's generally caused by lack of air circulation in the plant. The other thing to look out for is notches on the edges of the leaves. If you see real scalloped notches, that's a telltale sign of vine weevil, and if you see those notches, the adults are crawling up the plant and eating the edges of the leaves. Now, as far as different varieties go, there are all sorts and shapes and sizes to choose from the dwarfs like Rhododendron yakushi manum with its real dense crown of foliage and beautiful flowers. You can barely stick a pin for the flowers. There's also some fantastic lusty ones such as pink pearl, which grows to a really magnificent height and is covered in big bells of flower, and then also one that flowers at Christmas called Rhododendron Christmas Cheer. But some of my particular favourites, particularly now when I'm downwind of this flower, are the deciduous azaleas, which are types of rhododendron, Rhododendron luteum. As I say, these are deciduous, they lose their leaves in the autumn, but they have this beautiful spring flush of foliage which really complements their fantastic flowers. Now, rhododendrons have very fibrous root systems, which means that they're quite suitable for growing in containers. And that's useful if you've got an alkaline soil in the ground in your garden, because it means that they're easily grown in pots, and it means that you can use ericaceous compost like I've got here to grow successfully in a container. So as soon as you do a soil test in your garden, it should prove whether you can grow rhododendrons, azaleas and other ericaceous plants. So here, this garden is very, very acid, the soil, but if I lived on a chalky soil, then I would need to grow in acid conditions and I'd need to grow them in pots. So I've partially filled this container already with some ericaceous compost at the bottom. I've put some drainage material in the bottom as well to make sure that it holds that drainage hole open. It's important if you're going to plant a plant in a pot for a long time to have drainage material in the bottom, but if you're just going to summer plant in containers, then it's not necessary. But this plant has also been pre-soaked before I'm going to knock it out of the pot. But as I knock it out of the pot, you'll be able to see what an amazing fibrous root system it has. Really, really lovely fresh roots. So if you look at these roots, you can see that they're a really healthy tan colour, with a few little white bits where they're just starting into growth again. If this was very dark, that would suggest that a lot of the roots had died. And if you look right at the bottom of the pot, you can see that the bottom of the pot has been a bit waterlogged. So consequently, there are no living roots at the bottom. That's a useful sign to look for, that difference. So I'm just going to offer the whole of the root ball into the pot to see if I've got it just about right. And you can see the level of the compost is going to end up just slightly below the rim of the pot, which is perfect. So we've got enough compost in the bottom. I'm just going to use some more compost to dribble in around the edge, rocking the plant to one side. And that means that it will let that compost fall, and then I rock it the other way and let that compost dribble in around the edge of the pot, because we want to get it evenly filled in that pot. And it's quite a narrow gap to get that compost into. It's about the width of your fingers. You wouldn't pot up into a very big pot all in one go, because if you do that, then all the roots rush to the edge of the pot and you get a big area of compost inside the pot that isn't used by the roots. So when you buy a plant like this, just pot it up gradually and use ericaceous compost. So I'm going to carry on filling in around there just so that I've got all my compost poked down. You might find that you need to use a stick just to ram it down. Don't compact it too much, just let it settle down and lightly firm it, I suppose. And then when you've done that all the way round and you've got your compost level with the pot and you're sure that you've got it all the way around, then it's time to give it a good thorough water. Use rainwater rather than limey tap water to water this in, and this plant will be happy in here for a good 2 or 3 years, and then plant it up into a slightly larger pot again. Now, as with any containerised plant, watering ericaceous plants, it's really important to keep that compost quite nicely saturated and moist, because if the plants do dry out and you happen to be away for a day, then the plants will really suffer. And because they're evergreen, that leaf is what you get for the rest of the summer. So if the edges go brown, it can look a bit of a mess. So make sure that you give a really good glug of water to the base of the plant, watering at the bottom, and let it soak in nice and steadily into that compost. And then periodically, perhaps every other week or so during the growing season, you can feed it. And there are a lot of liquid feeds for ericaceous compost, which are really good. So they suggest putting about half a capful in around about a gallon or 4 to 5 litres of water. So capful of liquid feed into there. Give it a stir if it doesn't disperse very quickly. This has. And then while the compost is moist after the previous watering, give it another slosh, but this time with the feed in the water. And that will really help your plant keep it nice and green and make it produce more flowers next year. So I find that for some people, rhododendrons are a bit of a Marmite plant. You either love them or you hate them. Personally, I love them. Who couldn't resist a plant with this much flower power?